Okay, so this week we're going to talk about writing good items. We'll talk a little bit about different types of items and how to make sure those items are clearly written and understandable. Last time we met, we talked about the different guiding theories in survey design, and there aren't a lot, but there's the idea of cognition. We talked about the 4 steps of comprehension, retrieval, judgment, and reporting, and thinking about those as you're designing your items in your survey. We also talked in terms of motivation, and we used social exchange theory to think about how individuals get through a survey. And we want to maximize rewards and trust and minimize costs. And then we talked about optimization and satisficing. Satisficing is when respondents don't fully take the time to complete your surveys and kind of go through them quickly. So we want people to optimize. We want them to go through those 4 steps of comprehension, retrieval, judgment, and reporting. And then finally we ended with context. Context matters a lot, and so we can think about writing items that are conversational. So let's talk about different types of items. On the most basic level, you've got open and closed items. One way to think about this is who does the coding. So for an open-ended item, you, the researcher, does the coding. The nice thing about open-ended items, so you're just going to ask an open-ended item, people are going to provide you with a lot of textual information that you're going to have to then make sense of. The nice thing about it is you get the big picture and you can see what people are really thinking. The downside is you get a lot of textual information. If you're having people write on a survey, it can be hard to read. Closed-ended items, on the other hand, the respondent does the coding in that you've decided ahead of time what the framework is. And so you've got your different boxes that you want them to check or not. And you've got your response options. The problem here is, what does it really mean to strongly agree? And also, if you don't know sort of the universe of possibilities, you may get people answering in your framework instead of telling you what they really think. So you can see 2 ways to ask the same question. You can ask a person about their age with an open-ended item or a closed-ended item. The benefits of the open-ended item is you're going to get their age, and it's going to be a continuous variable that you can put into your research frame. You can ask it in a closed-ended, ask them to put a check in different boxes. The problem here is you don't know exactly how old they are. You just know they fit into one of these boxes. The benefit is people are more likely to tell you their age by checking a box. And sometimes age and how much money you make and ethnicity, those are considered sensitive items, so people might not want to share. So the benefits of the closed-ended is people are much more likely to answer them. The benefit of the open-ended is that you're going to get a continuous variable. So what are the pros and cons? You're going to get essentially more accurate information, albeit it could be messy when you have an open-ended item. You're going to minimize satisficing, so people are more likely to answer. They're more likely to give you honest answers when they do answer, but they're also more likely to skip open-ended items because they require lots of writing in some cases. You'll get more complete responses that are really what they're thinking about, not what you're thinking about. You're less concerned about non-attitudes, so people are less likely to just give you an answer when they don't really have an opinion. In an open-ended, much less likely to do that than in a closed-ended where they can easily just check a box. Open-ended are also good for probing and follow-up. Closed-ended, they're quick, cheap, and easy to create or to complete. They're actually time-consuming to create. The frame of reference is clear because it's your frame of reference as the researcher, and respondents really prefer closed-ended because they can be done pretty easily. It's a little bit unclear which are better. It depends on your research question, and if you know the universe of options. If you do, then closed-ended is great. If you're not sure and it's very exploratory, then open-ended is often a better way to go. And here's a somewhat in-between option. That's a partially closed. So you give them a closed-ended item with the option to fill in the blank if the response that they want to answer is not there. What about branching versus non-branching? If you read this item, you can see it's pretty confusing, right? If you have children, do they have a face that only a mother could love? Yes, I have children, but other mothers could love their faces. Yes, I have children, but only their mother could love their faces. And it goes on and on. You can see this is pretty laborious to read. A better way to go is to branch. So you have a question that says, first of all, do you have any children? If yes, then answer this question. If no, go to the next question. And because most surveys these days are electronic, it's really easy to create these items. So if they check no, they never even see the follow-up question. Okay, different types of close-ended. One is nominal. That is, there's no order to the answers. It's just check a box, check all that apply. There is no rank or order. Now the problem with this, I think we talked about this in past weeks, is that if you ask somebody to check all that apply, the tendency is to just check a few and then move on. So you're more likely to satisfy us with these check all that apply. A better option is to use the check yes or no over here on the right. And you can see the difference in doing that. You're likely to get many more yes checks when you use the version on the right than the version on the left. So you get much less satisficing with the yes or no. So that's actually the preferred method. Other types of close-ended, you have ordinal questions. So the responses, the respondents are provided with an ordered set of responses. And you've got rating scales. So the main type is a rating scale. So agreement response scales, confidence, construct-specific scales, also frequency response scales down here, the never to almost all the time. Now what about ranking versus rating? Oftentimes we have people rate things, right? We have them answer in a Likert type scale. But we can also have people provide a ranking. So you can imagine the same essential question here, asking people to either rank or rate the courses that they enjoyed in high school. And you can see we get slightly different, you'll see in a minute here that you get slightly different answers when you ask those different ways. So types of ranking, you've got full ranking. Please rank the following items where 1 is the strongest preference and 5 is your least strong preference. The problem with the rankings is they're not independent, right? So have you ever been asked to rank like a 20-item list? It's really hard to do because every item that you rank affects the order of the other items. So it's very a cognitively difficult task. So the most you should really ever ask somebody to rank is about 5 or 6 items. Anything more than that is just too difficult. You can also have a partial ranking, where you have a longer list, but maybe you say, please rank your top 3 or your top 5. And then you've got this minimal ranking where you just say, hey, from these lists, pick your top preference. So if you ask this question 2 different ways, you're going to get different answers, right? And I did this in one of my classes, and you can see that if I asked it as a ranking, the top item was social studies. As a rating, it was also social studies. But in terms of the least liked one, it was science when I asked to rank, and it was math when I asked to rate. Now these were 2 different groups, and they were small sample sizes, so you can't really say a whole lot about this, but this is just to say that you're asking the same question, but you're asking it in a slightly different way, and you really just have to think about what's my purpose with the item. So rankings versus ratings. The thing about rankings is there's no translation function. You can't take a ranking and turn it into a Likert scale. You can do the reverse, right? You can have people rate a bunch of items and then you can put them in rank order. Rankings, there's forced differentiation, so you're forcing people to pick, I like this one better than that one. Whereas in a rating, people could select 5 or 4s or 3s for all the different items. There is some evidence that rankings are more reliable and valid, but that's variable, depends on how they're asked. Ranking items can be a little bit tricky to analyze because the items are not independent of one another, and you can't create a scale score with a bunch of rankings. Ratings are nice because they're easy to use. The observations are independent, so they take a lot less cognitive effort to finish. They're faster for respondents, and they're easier to analyze. They're also easier for respondents to satisfy on. So it's really unclear what's better, ranking or rating. You have to think about what your question is and how best to get at that question. Okay, so for some other general guidelines, you want to avoid highly taxing questions. Remember, there's limits in long-term memory. You don't want people to have to do math, if you can help it. So the question combines both of these limitations. In the last year, how many hours did you use the internet? Well, first of all, who really knows that, right? We have limitations as to our ability to remember the amount that we've used the internet, especially if it's a lot. And then we have to calculate, right? So a better way to ask that would be to say, hey, in an average week, how many hours do you use the internet? It requires less math, and it takes into account limitations of memory. Here's another high-cost question, again, requiring people to do math. When you ask people to talk about or respond the amount of time, percentage that they do different activities, on a paper survey, this is really difficult, right? Because if I put 50 here and I put 10 here and 20 here, I got to make sure all these values add up to 100. This is a little bit less taxing in an online survey, which will often do the math for you. So as you put numbers in each of these places, it gives you the total, and so it's easier to shift things around. But in a paper survey, this is something that should be avoided. Okay, be careful with hypothetical questions. Things like, if USU were to move to Rockville, what would you think about that? Or, how many hours do you expect to use the internet next year? Or, suppose a new classmate told you they were HIV positive. How would you react to that? The problem with hypotheticals is we don't really know how we would react in a situation. We're happy to report what we think is the right answer, but until we're put into that situation, it's very hard to answer. So it's better to ask people about things that they have done in the past, or their attitudes or their opinions, not about behaviors that they might do in the future if something occurs. It's just hard to get very accurate information from items like that. George W. was pretty infamous for using non-standard language. The point here is to just be unambiguous. Use the most simple terms possible. There's no sense in using the word exhausted if tired is a better word. Just keep it simple. The KISS principle is really important here. Keep it simple, stupid. Make it simple to understand, and respondents will give you more accurate information. Okay, strive for clarity. I think I showed this to you in the previous class, but you can ask about remedies for a headache in two different ways. The first way asks in general, what remedies do you use for headaches? And the second one asks about brand of medicine. The first one is much more general. The second one is much more specific. And so you can imagine you're going to get different types of answers when you ask these questions. When asked on the left version, you can see we have a bunch of stuff about medicine, but then we also have things like sleep, laying quietly in a dark room. On the right, even when asked more specifically like that, so we're asking about brand, and people are providing things that aren't exactly a brand, like ibuprofen is not really a brand. Aleve and Tylenol are. So my point here is that strive for clarity. Figure out what it is you want to ask, and then ask it as specifically as possible. And you can see 50% on the left are medicinal remedies, 100% on the right are medicinal, but only 67% are brands.